Good morning. A few weeks ago, I pulled a video I had made because I was no longer comfortable with the conclusion I had come to. I had been uncertain about it even at the time, and feedback from some of my community members made me view the material differently. Still, the information and research that preceded it were still valid, and I got several comments asking me to edit the original video so they could still access the information and the references. So here is that video for you with the parts I have reviewed clearly highlighted. Thank you for your feedback. Together we do better research and make better videos. Welcome back to Ask Textile History, where you ask questions about textile history or textile science and I try to find the answers. Today we have a question from Patreon D. Hi Kristine, inspired by your last two videos and kind of on the same theme of textile treatment processes, I have a question. I buy most of the stuff that I want or need second-hand, so I have several vintage wool blankets. Some of them have labels saying that the wool is moth-proof. I'm curious to know what kind of process the blanket would have gone through for the manufacturer to make this claim. Bearing in mind, the blankets in question are likely from the 50s or 60s UK. A slightly more current curiosity is a feather and down duvet that I've seen because I'm currently looking to buy one, second-hand of course, that claims to be anti-dust-mite. Same questions apply. And D, those are some really great questions. Looking at research articles from the time, it does look like moth-proof would have been treated with an insecticide of some kind. Some of the most common being Mitin FF, Dieldrin and Ulan U33. DDT, a very popular insecticide used for anything and everything at the time, may also have been used. All of these fit into similar chemistry from the same time period with a central carbon structure and multiple chlorine atoms. It is probably safe to assume that even if your blankets weren't treated with one of these chemicals specifically, it would have been treated with something very similar to it. Chemically, these kinds of chlorinated organic compounds typically share especially three features. They are toxic to living organisms, including humans. They are challenging to break down in nature and wildlife, so they accumulate instead. And they are more likely to prefer being dissolved in fatty tissues of living creatures rather than water, aiding in said accumulation. I couldn't find any specific articles regarding the safety of such treatments or whether anyone were getting sick from using them when they were the most popular. One of the biggest problems with insecticides then and now is that they are really effective and take a long time to break down. This sounds like it shouldn't be a problem until you realize that insects are a really important part of our ecosystems. And when insects loaded with toxins get eaten by birds or other predators, the problem moves up the food chain until all are affected. Because of the accumulation in fat cells and liver tissue that I mentioned earlier, you typically end up having the top predators having the highest level of pesticides in any given ecosystem, and so they also suffer the most acutely from their toxic effects, even if they weren't really the original wildlife getting targeted by the insecticides. The treatment gets added when the wool gets dyed and sticks to the wool fibers in a slightly similar manner. The insecticides don't stick as closely to the fibers as dyes do though, in addition to slowly fading over time, they also wash out bit by bit, with some estimates assuming around 20 washes before the moth-proofing treatments need to be reapplied, and some modern spray canisters instruct that they need to be reapplied every year or so. This is the point at which, unable to find more research on specifically moth-proof wool and their chemicals, I wrapped up this section with a usual, to me, conclusion that buying secondhand is good because it reduces overall production and consumption, and the blankets would have lost so much of their original chemical coating that unless you licked or ate the blankets, they should be safe to use. I was a bit uncertain about this because I couldn't find any credible sources concluding one way or another, so when I had feedback from, very specifically, multiple Swedish charity shop volunteers that they had all been instructed to throw away any moth-proof wool they found for incineration, not textile recycling, it made me go back and look at the material differently. Now, I couldn't, and still can't, find more studies specifically on moth-proof wool and their effects on health or leaching to the environment. But rather than stopping there, what I could have done was do a bit more of a deep dive on one of the chemicals used to moth-proof wool. Because while, for instance, Mitin FF seems to maybe have been one of the more popular pesticides for moth-proofing wool, we do not know a lot of additional details about it because it wasn't very popular for other applications. But there was one chemical that was very popular at the time. Literal books have been written about the compound DDT and the effects it has had on our ecosystems and still has today. And since it may have been used to moth-proof wool blankets as well, I will take this as an excuse to launch into a brief history, aka rant, about DDT. So, unless you are a child of the 50s or 60s or a student of environmental chemistry, you may not have heard about DDT or para-para-dichlorodephanyl trichloroethane, DDT for short. It was first synthesized in 1874, and in 1939 it was discovered that it killed insects. The time preceding the Second World War saw a shortage of other insecticides, so DDT quickly rose in popularity, notoriety, and use, mostly on fields as an agricultural pesticide, but also as an at-home insect spray, powerful malaria deterrent, and even as an additive to children's wallpaper. To say it was everywhere from the 40s to the 60s, especially in the US, would have been an understatement. It was the wonder chemical that fed the globe and increased agricultural yields. Farmers would spray it directly on their cows so the flies would not bother them. People would spray it in kitchen cupboards to keep their food safe from insects like flower beetles, and soldiers would spray it in their camps to reduce diseases carried by insects. It was thought to be harmless to people and only dangerous to pests, and the longevity and stability was seen as a benefit. Spray once and the effects would last for months or even years. And then, in 1962, Rachel Carson, after observing the drastic fall in birdsong and forest activity around farm fields and conducting her own research into the matter as well as consulting with other experts, published the book Silent Spring. After several decades of people believing human activities could not possibly have an effect on the vastness of nature, this is widely regarded as the first ever book addressing the environmental impact of synthetic human-made chemicals. Carson and her publisher expected harsh rebuttals and even lawsuits for their work, which was so very critical of the use of pesticides. And indeed, some of the companies producing those pesticides threatened legal action against the publisher even before the book was published. Lobbyists filed lots of non-specific and sometimes anonymous complaints. Brochures were produced heavily promoting and defending pesticide use, and everything from Carson's education and expertise to her marshal status was questioned and harshly criticized. It didn't work though. If anything, the pamphlets and promotions of pesticides actually heightened the public's awareness of pesticide use and their potential risks, and the book garnered enormous attention, still to this day, especially because when attending debates, Carson was seen as very calm and collected, not at all the, extreme news spreading panicking person that she was portrayed as by her opposition. In 1972, the US banned DDT, and most of the world followed suit. Today, we know that DDT can cause a whole host of issues both in humans and wildlife. The biggest problem being that beyond its toxicity to living organisms, is that it accumulates in living tissue, particularly fat cells. At the same time, this chemical is hard to break down much beyond a few initial metabolites, and those metabolites are also toxic and accumulates in our cells over time. That means predators are particularly at risk as they are subjected to all the DDT and other persistent pollutants their prey has been taking up in their diets. Several of these compounds, including DDT, may also be transferred from mother to child through breast milk, worsening the problem over generations. In humans, DDT may be linked to increased rates of obesity, breast cancer, pancreatic cancer, neuropsychological dysfunction, hormone disruption, and reproductive challenges. But a lot of studies are either on the people who live in areas where DDT is sprayed for malaria protection, or people who have been exposed to larger amounts, such as living close to the production plants. So it is hard to say how much the dust from an old blanket would contribute to contamination in a house without some controlled studies. Especially since we cannot at this point find a reference group to compare the data with that does not have measurable levels of DDT in their body already. This compound is already everywhere. In the environment, DDT was among the original Dirty Dozen of the Stockholm Convention, the first ever agreement to ban certain chemicals from continuing to contaminate our planet. To make this dubious list, chemicals have to be persistent in nature over long periods of time, they have to bioaccumulate in wildlife, that is, the concentration grows in the creature over time and often over generations. They have to be toxic to humans and wildlife, and they have to be or have the potential for to do long-range transport, such as following ocean currents or traveling with the air movement without breaking down. So it is quite a list of requirements for the Stockholm Convention, and it takes a lot of intensive research, proof and attention to get a chemical or a group of chemical to even be considered to be on this list. These chemicals are also nicknamed forever chemicals for obvious reasons. It started with 12 in 2001. And there are currently 39 chemicals on this list, with several more being proposed for getting listed and under review. All that to say that DDT being one of the first to be included just shows how extensive the use and how measurable the harm was. We see DDT and its metabolites accumulate in fat tissue of both wildlife and humans. And while research studies in, for instance, wild bird have been and still are heavily biased towards Europe and North America, it is now widely accepted that no single creature on our planet is without at least some DDT in their bodies. When we look for this compound, we find it. DDT can still be detected in farming soils several decades after it was banned from use, and we still do not really know how to clean up heavily DDT contaminated sites or really how to get rid of it at all. But it would be dishonest to try to cover a history of DDT without also mentioning the challenges that came with banning it. After DDT was banned, malaria incidents and deaths rose again, especially around the equator and subtropics, sparking controversy. Countries like Sri Lanka, Madagascar, South Africa, and Mexico all struggled with malaria again as the ban on DDT took effect. Other methods and pesticides were tried, but none worked as well as DDT. In 2004, it was estimated that 2 million people died from malaria just that year, most of them African children under the age of 5. The wholesale ban received criticism for not being more nuanced in its approach and actively harming millions of people when an effective solution was known and within reach. In 2006, DDT was reintroduced specifically and only as a malaria deterrent. And yet again, we have been seeing a drop in malaria rates in the most affected countries. And since only small amounts are sprayed inside houses and not enormous amounts on crops, production is nowhere near what they were at their peak. But a story that was shared with me by a researcher of global air pollution during a university class was that there's more DDT than was ever released while DDT was legal, just hiding away in bags behind forgotten farm buildings after the ban and in barrels on the bottom of the sea, waiting, corroding and disintegrating its containers until it gets dispersed into the environment, wreaking untold havoc. The closest reference I could find on this is the recent discovery of tens of thousands of barrels on the seafloor off the coast of California, from back in the day when the attitude was that diluting would solve any pollution. Most of these barrels are assumed to contain DDT contaminated sludge from production at about 0.5% to 2% DDT per barrel. Research scientist Veronica Kivinson estimated the total DDT in these barrels to between 870 to 1450 tons altogether, actively leaking into the environment. It has been harming the marine food webs for decades already. Pelicans are laying eggs with eggshells so thin the chicks would die, bald eagles have vanished from the area, and tumors are appearing on bottom-feeding fish. This is not a problem of the past just because it got banned. It is something we will continue to deal with for centuries to come. Because again, we've tried a couple of things, but we haven't really found an effective way to clean these things up. Honestly, it is really hard not to make whole videos where this is the entire focus, because my whole PhD thesis was about developing faster methods to analyze some of these persistent chemicals in nature so that we can have more data to convince people with. Not that we really need more data, because there is so much data out there already. And if data and research was all it took, we would already be coordinating efforts to deal with some of these things. You cannot dilute a problem that doesn't really break down properly. It just ends up slowly dispersing across the whole world, which is exactly what we have been seeing with a lot of these forever chemicals. But this is a challenging issue to try to bring attention to, because once a chemical is dissolved in the ocean or the air, it is not something that can be seen with the naked eye. We need specialized equipment and careful sampling. How do you bring attention to an issue that cannot be seen, heard, smelled, or felt, except maybe if you were paying particular attention and knew what to look for, such as the slow decline of wildlife, even if their habitats are protected. And again, just to pull this back to moth-proof wool and the details surrounding that, DDT was not the most common pesticide used to moth-proof wool, but due to its enormous popularity, it is definitely one of the pesticides we know the most about and have studied the most extensively, with over 65,000 articles and book chapters and counting on the subject. And while not all pesticides are forever chemicals, it is no coincidence that most of the chemicals listed in the Stockholm Convention were originally chemicals used as pesticides. How does this affect the safety of our moth-proof blankets and other textiles? We don't know. We do not know how much of the originally applied pesticide is still left in the blanket after 60 years. We do not know how much the blankets would contribute to the indoor environment in addition to all the other items in our home. We do not know if the blanket you specifically found actually contains DDT or some of the other pesticides, and if those are less harmful or just less studied. Because health and safety regulations are quite literally written in blood, and we are in the finding out portions of our predecessors and mucking about. When it comes to anti-dust-mite duvets, the issue is not so much that dust mites damage the feather down pillow or duvet, but that some people develop allergies towards them. From what I could find, and that was not a lot, there are a couple of different things that make your bedding less appealing to dust mites and other house mites, which are everywhere around us, but too small for us to see with the naked eye. Some of the non-chemical treatments include very tightly woven pillow and duvet cases that surround these down feathers so that the dust mites physically cannot get in, Producers also recommend airing out your bedding thoroughly every day to reduce moisture levels and to wash your bedding according to the care instructions regularly. When it comes to chemically reducing the number of mites that bother those allergic to them, it is very much the same process as for moth-proofing blankets. Except instead of calling them insecticides, we call them acaricides because they target mites specifically. One of the chemicals typically used against dust mites is permethrin, and wouldn't you know it, there is an organic carbon core and some chlorine atoms right here on the edge. What a surprise. There's also some work being tested out to use eugenol, the main ingredient in clove oil, to scare those pesky mites away as well. The problem, as is so often the case, is that unless a company is forthcoming with the method they have chosen when it comes to dust mite proofing their duvets and pillows, you simply cannot know whether they used physical or chemical methods. They often do not wish to disclose this, excusing themselves with company secrets and what have you. Honestly, this is one of my main gripes with the textile industry. Why, when we have so strict rules for things like the cosmetics industry, do we allow clothing worn against our skin all day long to list nothing but their fiber content on the garment tag? What about the dyes, treatments, plasticizers in synthetic textiles, mordants for the dyes, anti-wrinkle treatments, anti-stain treatments? In short, I wish the textile industry was regulated a lot more like the cosmetic industry, where every chemical used in the processing from the fiber gets harvested in the field or shorn from the sheep, all the way until you buy a fabric in a fabric shop or pull a clothing off the rack in a garment store, has to be listed on the garment tag of the finished article of clothing or the textile you are buying. I think that would lead to some very interesting customer reactions and questions. Thank you for watching this, yet another episode of Ask Textile History. I hope you enjoyed, and that together we learn about some of the many big and small ways the textile industry works and operates. As much as we can get access to, anyway. As always, references are in the description box below. Thank you very much to Dee for asking these questions, and to the rest of my patrons who helped me bring this sort of content to you, so we can all get a little bit more informed. If you wish to support my work so I can answer more questions like these from viewers like you, Patreon is the best place to do so. Until next time, bye! Welcome back to... Oh, good morning, Vivi. Hi. Oh, Vivi. Welcome back to another Ask Textile History. Today we have a question from our patron, Dee. Hi. Am I talking on top of your nap?